Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Gateway Spotlight. I'm your host, Brooke Roberts, and we are here today talking with Chris Parrish of Podium Education. And we're going to dive deep. We actually just got off a great conversation before we started recording. So this is going to be good. I don't want to go too far into all the introductions about what we're going to talk about today, but generally speaking, the idea of capacity building in international education is always top of mind for those of us who've been in the field for a very long time. We're constantly talking about how do we get more students participating in study abroad, used to be the one way we talk about, but then global learning in general. But sometimes they just fall flat. You know, we're stuck at that 10%, 2% number over the past 10, 15, 20 years. And so the question is, can we achieve our ideal international education learning outcomes without sending students anywhere? So in today's episode, we're talking with the founder of Podium, Chris Parrish, and Podium's aiming to bridge the global divide between those students with access to rich global learning experiences and those without that access. So their mission over at Podium is to reach the other 98% through virtual collaboration programs focused on real world challenges, ideas, and skills. Thanks so much for being here, Chris. I'm going to skip your big formal intro because we're going to be diving deep into your story and everything that you've been able to accomplish with Podium. And so I have to start all of these conversations with your international ed story, especially somebody who's doing something pretty unique. I know you came from the management consulting and another big ed tech company, but how did you get your interest piqued in international education?
Sure. Lovely to meet you. Thank you for having me, Brooke. I'm excited for this conversation. And oh, by the way, this is a real background. So if you guys do see anybody walking through here, we just finished up filming some of our new global case studies and projects. There's a real production studio behind me and we're breaking it down, but I think for the most part, they're going to stay off camera here. But yeah, my international education story, there's so many good ones. I'll pick on one near and dear to my heart that features my mom. So my mom is a first generation American. Her parents, my grandparents, came over from Ireland when they were in their teens. And the first time that I got to go back to Ireland, obviously I have a ton of family still over there, cousins and whatnot. I had this sort of out of body experience the first time that I stepped off the plane. I'm sure you can relate to this. Like when you go back somewhere and you're like, wow, these are my roots, right? This is where my family's from. And there was an element of familiarity to everything, even though I was seeing it all for the first time. And that was really an incredible feeling, only matched by the first time that I stepped down in Mexico City, of all places. I've done the 23andMe and I have 0% Mexican in me, but somewhere along the line, I'm connected to that city and that culture in such a unique way. And that to me is one of the cooler parts about international education and global education, is connecting the dots between two seemingly disparate cultures. Like Ireland and Mexico to me feel very similar. And, if I could convince myself that I'm originally from Mexico City if I sat here long enough, but my lineage data tells me that it's actually Ireland, but I do feel a similar connection to both places.
Yeah. So going back when you were in college, was study abroad on your radar? Is that something that you had thought about when you were entering college, or did you make it happen?
Yeah, good question. I actually did not study abroad while I was in college. No, I did several abroad trips while I was in college, I would say, that highlighted by following my college graduation. I went to South America for 2 months and did the Bolivia, Peru, Chile track, saw Machu Picchu and a bunch of other big highlights there. But I didn't formally study abroad. At the time, I was laser focused on getting my 4-year degree as quickly as possible. I don't come from a background of a lot of money or an upbringing like that, first generation. So making sure that I got all my credits on campus as quickly as possible is really where I was focused when I did my undergraduate work at the University of Maryland.
Cool. So I did a little creeping of you on LinkedIn.
Slight stalking.
I know if your LinkedIn is updated, then I know a lot about you. But so you decided after college, you went into management consulting, then later went to 2U, which if the audience doesn't know, is a huge ed tech company. Actually, a friend of mine works there as well. So I know it's huge and it's growing, and you were able to help catapult that company to new heights. What attracted you to international education
Yeah.
through Podium?
Yeah, good question. So almost the right path there. So I actually ran into 2U, I'll put it that way. I was the 8th employee there while I was still in college at the University of Maryland. So I started there as like the founding intern, we like to joke, at 2U. So my boss at the time was Chip Pausek, who's still the CEO of 2U, a mentor of mine. And I'm 34, and I was reflecting yesterday actually that the first time that I met Chip, I remember he was 34, and I remember thinking like, that guy's so old. So now all of a sudden I'm back in his shoes. But you know, education, ed tech, all these terms that we use now, it wasn't really a thing in 2008 when I first met 2U. It really wasn't. And I was interested in 2U's business at the time, but I had sort of this shimmering idea. I don't know why, but like this sort of fascination with doing banking and consulting, which was like, they were the it careers back then. Tech wasn't then what it is now. So I ended up working for Merrill Lynch for a summer on Wall Street, hated it. And I was very bad at it too. And then tried my hand at consulting, did that for a couple of years, and then realized that I really wanted to be at 2U. And really with a connection to education, which, you know, for in my opinion, one of the best things that we've done as a country is make the 4-year degree accessible through federal financial aid and those sort of means. And there's no better tool for social mobility in the US at least than getting an education. I'm a huge believer in the 4-year degree. And 2U was sort of the leading company at that point in time thinking about new ways to put education online with great universities to make it more accessible. So it sort of tugged at things that were close to my heart around accessibility and the importance of an education and what an online modality can do to bring that to light. And as you mentioned, I was with 2U for a long time, a lot of different roles. Was most recently, before I left, the senior vice president of programs, where I oversaw all new university deals that we did, and then a portfolio of current universities. But I got interested in Podium because as I sort of scanned the proverbial institution, if you will, looking for areas that had yet to be uplifted with this new move to digital. You know, 2U really focused on master's degrees. They were doing some stuff at the undergraduate level, but mostly master's degrees. And I thought it was a great opportunity to start looking at the components that go into the undergraduate degree and figure out which ones could be boosted by a new approach to a digital alternative for that area. So that's when I began to hone in on global education offices and this idea that we could potentially build a digital program that is not a replacement for study abroad, but just an alternative for students who can't study abroad for one reason or another. And as we were talking about before we jumped on, I think the 2 data points that popped out to me as we were looking at these global education offices is that on one side of the aisle, you know, most universities now have it in their mission statement, their vision statement, strategy statement, pick whatever statement at the highest level of the university. Most of them have acknowledgement about the importance of giving undergraduate students some sort of global skills, right? The skills needed to make a global impact or be a better global citizen. These are statements you're going to see at most universities. Yet, although it's not a perfect proxy for how well we do that, one good proxy is looking at the percentage of students that study abroad. And whether it's 2% per year or the 10% over the full 4-year degree, what we know is that the majority of students do not study abroad in the US every year. So that's really when we got excited about starting Podium, is thinking of a way to build a digital program that is a good fit for those students who can't study abroad for one reason or another, to get those really critical global skills that we agree with universities should be at sort of the top end of importance as they think about their strategy over the next couple of years.
Well, one of the questions I was going to ask was sort of what is that first iteration of Podium? But I feel like I want to be cognizant of time, and I have like a bazillion questions for you. So why don't you describe for us what is Podium? Like, treat me like I'm a university administrator, which I am, and you're like, what is it I'm getting if I'm like I'm in Podium?
Yeah, you're in Podium. Podium, we're an experiential learning company, and right now we basically have one program. The Global Tech Program, which is the term that you'll hear universities use to describe what we're doing. You say, are they doing global tech? Are you doing global tech? That's what I hear all the time. So the Global Tech Program is really our flagship offering at universities. And what it is, it's an experience that combines some elements of an internship, some elements of a course, and some elements of a study abroad experience, all digital. So there's really three main components to global tech. The first component is, actually, before I give you the components, I think there's three main, oh, it looks like we have a visitor.
Oh, I don't.
Marshall's on my team. Marshall, I think
Oh, okay.
He probably went to my calendar on Google. And clicked on
Oh,
it.
okay, great.
Sorry
I was like,
about that.
hello. Hi.
Yes. So the Global Tech Experience, it's a 6-credit experience and it runs under our University Partners brand. Most partners grant internship credit or experiential learning credit for it. And the program itself has three main components. The first one is we wanted global tech to feel as real world as possible for students. So the way that we solved for that is we went out and struck partnership agreements with some of the most well-recognized companies in the world. So students get to learn directly from companies like Netflix, Airbnb, Spotify, the Red Cross, Kiva. We try and touch every industry, but they get these real world projects and case studies and get to wrestle with global issues and global problems the same way that an analyst or an intern at those companies might do so. And that really is sort of the bedrock of the program. In fact, each week's worth of content starts with one of those real world company case studies. It's also an experiential learning program. So students are working hands-on within the software applications that we've heard from employers are most in demand. So students get to work with Tableau, which is a data visualization software, Shopify to create a digital storefront, JavaScript, and all different types of software applications. So they gain those really critical skills and experiences. And then the third leg to the stool, the third attribute is we think we've come up with a pretty clever approach to fostering intercultural learning online. So I'm sure this is an area you're going to want to dive more deeply into. But we are fortunate enough to hire Dr. Darla Deerdorf, who I'm sure all of your listeners are quite familiar with, to advise us on the intercultural curriculum and ways that we can do things different than it's been done before. And at Podium, we really bring together these two seemingly disparate skill sets. On one side, it's the tech skills, and on the other side, it's intercultural competency. But if you look through them through the prism of career readiness, they actually make a ton of sense to be put together, right? These are things that employers are looking for. And I would say the flagship component of the intercultural curriculum is that students get together in global tech over a global live lab each week. So Brooke, are you a Pelotoner by any chance?
No, but
Okay.
you've just outed me.
Yeah, it's all good. You just tell me that you ride your bike outside instead.
Yeah.
There you go. But the global live lab experience sort of looks like if Zoom and Peloton had a baby together. That's sort of the inspiration behind it. Okay. And students get to work in small groups with other students from around the world. So we had representation from 38 different countries last summer, and we'll see an increase in that this year. So you could have a student from University of Tennessee, the SUNY system, Una Norte in Colombia, and Deakin University in Australia, all working on that Netflix global project together. And that really, to me, is sort of the flagship highlight moment for students, is that they get to work in these teams and really diverse teams and work alongside folks different from themselves, and in some ways resembles some of the core components of COIL.
Okay, yeah, that's really fascinating. So how long are the programs then? Do they vary, or is it sort of like a
Good question.
Standard?
Yeah. It's standard. So we run it over a 10-week term in the summer and then 14-week term in the fall and spring. And we usually have 2 cohort starts for each of those. So we have like our quarter schools will start on one date, and then the other date will be for more semester-length schools.
What has been I'm going rogue. This is not a question
I
prepped you for. But what has been, or what was maybe one of the bigger, I guess, growing pains of this process? Like, where did you, when you initially started this idea, I mean, it sounds amazing, but I'm sure you hit some roadblocks or bumps along the way that you had to tackle. What were some of those, especially in the early days? Yeah,
that's a great question. There's a bunch of things that have been fun to figure out. I think early on, honestly, Brooke, we started Podium in 2019. So this is way pre-COVID. Like, it wasn't even on the radar at this point in time. And I think the adoption and embracing of what people used to refer to as virtual programming. I prefer using the word digital, because virtual, I kind of think of like headsets and like VR stuff, and it's not what we're doing here. But I think it was a pretty new concept to a lot of international education when we started Podium. So rightfully so, there's a little bit of a slow roll as we got going to get the buy-in that you could really do this online in a way that, once again, not a replacement for study abroad, but just an alternative. And then through COVID, as that hit in universities, we're anxious to put high quality digital options in front of students. a lot of universities actually have global requirements for graduation, right? All of a sudden, the global tech program became really interesting to a lot of universities. And that's really where in business, they call it a hockey stick moment, really where we started growing quite quickly as an organization. And then anytime you grow, right, like the most important thing that I do throughout my time with Podium is actually hiring really great people. So we have a team of 50 full-time employees now. I promised I'd shout them out. So including Becky and Natalie, two of our great program advisors. And just like little things, right? Like this is my first company that I ever started. So like making sure that the fridge has water in it and that the bathrooms are clean and that the paper towels are there, right? That's all stuff that you might read about in a book in business school, but when you're doing it yourself, it's a whole different level of growing pains.
Yeah, it's like the user experience. I think people in international ed, we've been talking about user experience and UX design. We didn't call it that since the beginning of study abroad. Is like how do you actually put all the pieces together? In the early days, it was all about logistics.
Yeah.
And then later, as the field matured, people realized, we're not just travel agents. We don't just
That's right.
Housing. We actually create learning interventions and opportunities and they're facilitated. They have to be facilitated. We can't expect through osmosis, you're in France and now you're enlightened global citizens. So
yeah, and I think that's another area that's worth highlighting too, as we've evolved. So you ask, what was it like early on and then compared to today? So global tech is the overarching umbrella term, but there's actually 3 different tracks that students can choose from. There's our global data track, global e-commerce marketing, and global coding. They all have those shared components of the real world case studies, the experiential software applications, and then the intercultural framework. But we film and build all that in-house. So like you're seeing the studio behind me, that takes time. So we started with global data. That was our first one that we built. We learned a ton based on student feedback about what projects they like, what pieces of the intercultural framework need to be flushed out more, and then went on to build digital marketing and coding thereafter. So now we have all 3 live, and we're on iteration 2 of each of them. So we're constantly trying to keep it up to date based on not just student feedback, but also what these companies are doing. So a good live example is we had an awesome project and case study on WeWork last year. And then I'm sure most people are familiar with WeWork went up in flames.
Yeah.
There's a lot of great Netflix shows about WeWork, and all of a sudden we had to pull that out, right, and redesign it because it was no longer relevant for students. So that's sort of the constant hustle and hamster wheel that we're on to keep this program as great as it can be for students.
Right. It's really interesting. Okay, so I have to ask, I'm really excited about this, but I'm kind of a nerd. I like this idea. I want to take these classes and do the case studies. But what about from a student perspective, or even administrators who are thinking about the broad spectrum? Because obviously this sounds like it really fits nicely in the STEM side of the house. Like, this would be a really great globalized experience for STEM students. And I think everybody watching, you should be taking note of that, because that's a group of students that have notoriously been even more left behind in terms of participation.
Sure.
But I'm curious, like, how was this? How do you convince me? I'm an English literature major. Like, why do I need global analyst data skills, whatever? Like, they don't even know what to call it. How does this fit into the broader sort of student experience across majors and across disciplines?
Great question. Yeah. So the way that I always step back and try and think about this too is that sometimes I'll get questions from deans or provosts or presidents or faculty department chairs like, is this a minor? What is this thing? Like, is this a major? And like, there's like these like containers that we've designed in higher ed that, like, when I tell them like it's neither of that, it's 6 credits. It's like short circuiting because we're just not used to that, because it's a container that doesn't exist, but that's really what it is. So oftentimes what's fun to explore with our university partners is like, it's 6 credits. Usually it's general elective for most universities. So it's 6 out of the 120 for students. It's not a mandated thing. It's usually completely optional for them to do on their path towards their 120 credits. We do have some partners that require it as part of like the global education requirement for graduation, but most partners, it's general education. And what's interesting about global tech is that somewhere between 40 and 50% of students are from the humanities, or generally arts and sciences. So this is a program that appeals to the student that maybe in the back of their mind knows that they should get some skills that will immediately translate to that first entry-level job. And there's obviously a ton of research out there on liberal arts grads and how over time they actually have better career success than some of their STEM counterparts, but it's that first job that's a little bit of a struggle for them. And the way that global tech is packaged is they actually get these badges in the software applications I mentioned, plus an intercultural skills specialist badge. And it sets up well and is well packaged in a way that is appealing to prospective employers. So that's the main draw, I think, for the humanities and arts and sciences student, is that there's no prereqs. It's not like you've got to go learn calculus or something like that. We're teaching applied work the same way that you might learn it within an internship. So that's awfully appealing to them. And then on the flip side, you mentioned STEM. Like what's been fascinating for me to see is the most common major that enrolls in our global coding program is computer science. And that shocked me for a while. Couldn't really understand why that might be, because I was thinking like global coding, wouldn't that be like lightweight for computer science students? But after doing a bunch of student interviews, what we found out is that once again, like the applied nature of learning the tools is something that they don't necessarily get in their computer science major. And then they also know that there's a bit of a stereotype behind technical students that perhaps they wouldn't be great in working in diverse teams. And for them, getting the intercultural skills specialist badge and certification is a differentiation point for the hiring process, right? I'm not just a software engineer, but I'm also a software engineer that has these intercultural skills. So as an employer, you can be comfortable me working on a really diverse team and building products for a diverse set of users. And I think those are sort of the two most common student stereotypes. You have like the career-oriented liberal arts humanities student, and then you have that STEM student that's looking to differentiate themselves as well.
Oh, I love that. Okay, well, I've already drank the Kool-Aid, but here I just want to remind the audience, if you're watching, you have questions for Chris or any comments, please add them to the chat so we can dive into those if we have some time. We're almost at the end, but please add them to the chat. We'd love to hear your thoughts on all this. One of the things I wanted to talk about is, your banner on LinkedIn says outcomes first.
Yeah.
Which I love. And, as educators, we're always thinking about assessment. Not all of us have as much time or as much bandwidth to do it as much as we'd love to implement. But, one of the things we talked about before we started recording, and one of my fears with digital, I'm not scared of digital. It's just sort of this idea of welcoming in and bringing in digital experiences, and that we create sort of a class system with international ed. It's already pretty a class system, but it's going to only exacerbate it by saying, oh, you can afford to move and do the global mobility piece, so you get this experience. But the rest of you have to quote unquote settle for a digital experience. And obviously that doesn't have to be the case. You can have a really rewarding and meaningful digital experience if it's designed well. So speaking to that and your work with Darla Deerdorf, I'm curious to know, what are those outcomes, especially on that global competence, intercultural awareness? You said that there's a certificate or a badge of some kind. Can you talk to that piece a little bit more?
Definitely. So there's sort of, I guess, three key ways that we measure how students are faring in the program, and then the outcomes associated with those students. So first and foremost, we're huge proponents and followers of the Net Promoter Score, NPS. You don't see NPS in education too often. You see it a lot in consumer products. So for listeners, you've all seen the NPS question somewhere. It's how likely are you to recommend this product or service to a friend or colleague? So Apple asks you it all the time. Netflix asks you it all the time. And we borrowed that same framework to get a sense for how students are enjoying the program. So right now, 94% of students that enroll in global tech would recommend it to a friend or colleague, which is great. We're really, really proud of that. And that tells us that students are excited about the program and they feel like there's an ROI there, if you will, and it's sort of worth their time, effort, and money in that way. Related to the academic side of things, we first on the intercultural side have designed an impact assessment with Dr. Deerdorf. So this, instead of a pre and post, what we do at the end of the term is ask students to rate their intercultural competency across a couple different layers before the program and then after the program. So one of the questions that we ask them is, do you understand the importance of intercultural competency in your field and in your career? And I just got the latest data last week. 37% of students rank themselves as like very proficient in intercultural competency at the start of the program, and then 81% rank themselves as proficient at the end of the program. So we slice the data a bunch of different ways, but that sort of growth on the impact side is a testament that allows us to feel like, you know, we are making the impact on the intercultural side in a way that is akin to what you might see in a conventional study abroad program. And I have partners, Josh McEwen at SUNY Oswego really pushes us on thinking about assessment strategically and at the depth that is required to prove out to international education that this can be done well. And he's the first one that says that, you know, one of the best things about global tech is that we can actually control the intercultural experience for students in a way where it's one thing to send 7 students to Milan, Italy, and sort of hope that they, you know, meet the locals and embed themselves in Italian culture, but they also might sit in their dorm room with 6 other Americans and drink cheap wine just to paint in bright colors. And in the global tech program itself, you can actually control that experience a bit. So that impact is a key piece to that. And then we also ask students things like, did you learn a new tech skill, right? The other side of things. And 99% of students say that they've learned a new tech skill in the program. So those are sort of 3 key metrics for us. And then we track things, Brooke, like the badges that we push directly to their LinkedIn profile. We can use that to see how students are moving through their career post-graduation.
That's really cool. So what's the next hurdle or mountain Podium is climbing? Like, what's the next iteration that doesn't exist yet, or it's something you guys are working on the back end that we can get excited about?
Okay, a little bit of behind the scenes.
Yeah,
we are very interested in helping students get closer to landing a job, a global position at companies. So even the local job is now global, meaning that regardless of where students are, whether it's Johnson County Community College or SUNY or Tennessee, once they graduate, that job they're in, they're going to be expected to work in diverse teams and likely with folks from all over the world. So we're seeing the prominence of these global jobs increase. So what I think you'll see us design next is perhaps an actual employed position or an internship position, focusing on a global job at an iconic company, where I've had a few conversations with great employers like Coca-Cola, who are really excited about the idea of gaining access to a pipeline of students that are intercultural skills specialists that also know some really in-demand software applications, and they can deploy them on projects that require both lenses, right? Both the intercultural lens as well as the tech lens. So I think that sort of scaled experiential experience is likely where we head next.
That's really exciting. That's very exciting. Everybody, you heard it here first. We got the exclusive. So I guess, well, before we round out the conversation, Joanna Zimmerman posted a comment and question in the chat. Thank you, Joanna, for participating. We appreciate it. And she said, to Brooke's point about potential inequalities, while digital experiences can capture more learners than in-person study abroad, there are also vastly different levels of access to strong internet and even electricity around the globe or in the United States. I'm from rural Kansas, and fast internet is still challenging there. So I hear you, Joanna. So her question is, how is Podium thinking about addressing this in the near or long term? And what do you think you will need in order to do this well?
Yeah, that's a great question. Infrastructure around connectivity is a critical component to really embedding yourself in global tech. So I mentioned before that last summer we had representation from 38 different countries in the global tech program. So that is IP addresses dialing in from 38 different countries into global tech and those live labs in particular. This summer, I think we'll be closer to 60, given some of the partnerships that we've created. And just to give you a sense of scale, last year we supported about 3,000 students. We'll support about 20,000 this year. So it is growing quite quickly.
Amazing.
Thank you. Yeah, really proud of that too. And I think even more interesting than like the global question is the domestic one. So we work with everybody from large R1 publics like ASU, University of Arizona, Tennessee, to small privates like Loyola, Creighton, and then everybody in between. So we also work with our country's first HBCU at Cheney University outside of Philly. And each of the student groups in those universities are unique in terms of their needs and what their access to computer and internet requires. So we have a team of program advisors that support students one-to-one. to the extent where I've heard them on the phone coaching students about how to get to a local library so that they could log into a computer to dial into global tech. So right now that internet access is a key piece to what we do. But we have put all of our software in the cloud, so to speak. So students don't have to download anything on their machine. They can work 100% from a shared computer in that way and access all the assignments and the software applications that are required to complete the program. So in some ways, if you were sort of a glutton for punishment, you could get through global tech with just your phone. But obviously, as you work with more complex software applications, it's awfully helpful to have a computer in front of you. So I don't know if that's a perfect answer, but we're trying our best to support students. And a second element to that are accessibility accommodations as well, which is something that we do on a one-to-one student basis.
I think just going to put a plug, everybody, for us community college people. You didn't mention any, and I would say that there's a vast majority of students at community colleges who also, I think, deserve and need this type of experience. So that's definitely a set of institutions I would encourage you to look into. And so I just want to round this question out. Thank you, Joanna, for your question. But can you leave us with a feel-good story? You describe yourself as a, eternal optimist, which I love. Can you give us a story or a favorite story? I'm sure you have many of a student, whether a US student or a student from one of your international institutions that went through global tech and sort of came out on the other side with kind of a really compelling case study.
Yeah, sure. So I guess first heartwarming story is that I am welcoming my second child tomorrow. So I got this in just in time.
Yes.
But I'll be a father of two as of tomorrow, which I'm super excited about. But
congratulations.
Thank you. But relative to work in global tech, there's a student story that stands out in my mind. We had a student from one of our university partners last summer who joined the global tech program, particularly interested in the technical side of things. They weren't necessarily so concerned with the intercultural piece. In fact, we got some feedback from them early on that they were worried about the woke nature of some of our curriculum and pushing them to think differently about some of these ideas, which I know in international education, like we do hear that feedback from some students. And this student in particular was sensitive to that early on. And then we did a story circles activity with the team, which is a framework that Dr. Deerdorf has helped to bolster with UNESCO in particular. And that student was so moved by story circles that he sort of started thinking about the intercultural piece much differently and began to explore that side of his own skill set and passion. And we just heard a couple of weeks ago that he's actually a finalist for a full-time job at the UN. So he sort of went full circle from somebody specifically interested in the tech skills, skeptical of the intercultural side. And then once they got exposed to the intercultural side, they sort of saw the importance of it from a career readiness standpoint, and is now hopefully going to land that position with the UN, which would be, I think, just amazing for that particular student.
That's amazing. Well, thank you for that. Brooks, who's the CEO and your co-founder, when I was chatting with him, he was telling me about the story circles, and I thought, like, I want to be in one. He was talking about people being in tears, and it was being very moving. And I was like, oh, I need to know how to do this, facilitate it for my students. So that sounds amazing. I also have to mention, everybody, that Podium Education has been very generous a sponsor of the Gateway Spotlight. So thank you so much for that. And for those of you who want to connect with Chris, well, the team, he's probably going to be on paternity leave very shortly, but if you want to connect with the Podium team and learn more about maybe how you can get it involved in your campus and how you can integrate it into what you're doing in international ed, just go to podiumeducation.com and we will link to Chris's LinkedIn so you can congratulate him on the new baby and all the things over there as well. So thank you so much for this conversation. I could keep you here forever, but I'm not allowed. 30 minutes is where we have to cut off. So thanks, Chris.
Of course.
Okay,
lovely chatting with you. Thanks, Brooke.
For being here, and be sure to check out future episodes of the Gateway Spotlight series over at gatewayinternational.org, and we will see you in a couple of weeks. Thanks, everybody. Bye.